Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Dear colleagues, I rise today in support of Bill S-203, the Protecting Young Persons from Exposure to Pornography Act, introduced in this House by Senator Miville-Deschênes, and I thank her for her commitment and her determination. Since the introduction of this bill on September 9, 2020, much ink has been spilled. From the publication in the New York Times of an article entitled The Children of Pornhub, to the announcement of the Minister of Canadian Heritage's bill to create a regulatory body to combat child exploitation and online hate speech, to the study conducted by the Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics in the other place, on the protection of privacy and reputation on platforms such as Pornhub. Much has been said and announced. Moreover, the recent testimonies received at committee in the other place were more than disturbing. It was shocking to hear a young victim explain the hell she went through to have sexual images of her taken when she was a minor, removed from these platforms. And to hear company executives claim that they are doing everything in their power to protect young people from sexual exploitation, even though they did not report any cases to the authorities until June 2020, confirms my doubts about certain practices in this industry.
Given the recent developments, I remain concerned about how the platform Pornhub can meet all of its new commitments regarding the protection, or as they call it, trust and safety of the community, and how Canada can hold it accountable and impose greater transparency on its safety measures. The Government of Canada has been urged to take real action on this issue for some time. So let's hope that the bill to be introduced by the Ministry of Canadian Heritage will answer some of these questions. Le projet de loi S-203 est complété.
Bill S-203 is complementary to these recent developments as it addresses another component of the problem. Rather than acting on the content or uploading of sexually explicit material, it acts on access to the viewing of that content. S-203 seeks to protect Canadians, particularly women and youth, from the harmful effects of exposure to sexually explicit material, including degrading material, and material that presents sexual violence. It also empowers the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness to require Internet service providers to take measures to prevent sexually explicit material from being made available to youth on the Internet. In short, it seeks to protect the health of our youth and is consistent with international efforts to better regulate online activities, which have been on the rise since the beginning of the pandemic, unfortunately. Indeed, porn sites have released statistics on traffic on their platforms since the outbreak of COVID-19. According to Pornhub's data released on March 25, 2020, the site saw a 21.5% increase in traffic to its platform in Canada alone, compared to an average pre-pandemic day. As luck would have it, this increase coincided with the availability of a free section of the site that is usually behind a paywall. This trend of increasing consumption is not unique to Canada. In all countries where data were available for the period from the end of February to the end of March 2020, an increase in online pornography use ranging from 4 to 24% was recorded. The increase was more pronounced in countries where access was made free, as was the case in Canada. These platforms justify the temporary free access to their content as a way of contributing to the well-being of consumers during the pandemic. I would like to question the humanitarian nature of such a decision, dear colleagues. Let's not fool ourselves. Offering free access is a way to attract new customers and potentially new paid subscriptions. Moreover, the data collected by these platforms can also be a goldmine for some of them.
When examining Bill S-203, I focused on the impact of pornography on young people in the LGBTQ2+ community, and it was not easy, I have to admit, since few studies have looked specifically at this category of young people. In addition, we must remember that this is a diverse population. A study of porn's effects on young gay men, for example, is not indicative of its impacts on trans people. I was stunned to learn to what extent watching sexually explicit content can shock or even traumatize young people's developing brains. Sometimes they cannot assimilate or understand what they're seeing, and multiple reactions can be observed. Some young people said they were frightened. Others were sad, confused, or excited when seeing pornography for the first time. How they react depends in part of their stage of development, their age at first exposure to pornographic images, and their individual experiences. Tout aussi troublant.
Equally troubling, the vast majority of studies reviewed indicated that one of the primary motivations for youth, especially those in the LGBTQ+ communities, to access pornography is the need for information about sexuality. For youth in the LGBTQ2+ communities, this stems in part from a lack of information and representation in the public sphere of non-heteronormative sexuality. Many young people are looking for different role models who represent the sexual and gender diversity truly found in society. However, since they do not necessarily find them elsewhere, they turn to porn. I have received colleagues from young people asking me not to ban access to pornography for minors because it was the only way for them to get sexual education. Colleagues, it is immensely sad that our youth must turn to online porn sites for this type of learning. Some commercial pornography sites have set up so-called educational sections to supposedly address this educational need. One may wonder about the motives for setting up such sections. Is it really to offer education in good faith, or simply to attract more consumers and generate more views? The danger of this form of online learning, in my view, is that young minors do not necessarily have the discernment or maturity to distinguish between what is real and what is fictional, what is acceptable and what is not, and what is a healthy relationship to sexuality. In educating themselves this way, they may wish to replicate some of the inappropriate behaviors they see. They may compare themselves to what they see and have certain expectations of themselves and their partners, which can affect their self-esteem, sex life, and relationships. A committee study of Bill S-203 would allow the owners of these platforms to explain the objectives of these self-assigned educational missions.
An insightful study was conducted on the use of a sexually explicit media by young men aged 14 to 17 who are members of sexual minorities. Here are some of the findings. Exposure to pornography, including risky sexual behavior, such as penetration without a condom, for example, can lead young people to engage in similar risky behavior. When these young men have few healthy, positive models of homosexual relationships, viewing pornography too early in their sexual development, even more before their first experiences, can increase the chances that behavior seen in pornography shapes their view of sexuality and relationships with their partners. Lastly, during the study, young people reported that pornography had influenced their expectations and that it had taught them or shaped their sexual interests. Although the study says at the outset that more extensive analysis is needed to validate the findings, I'm sure you would agree that these data are still eye-opening. This is why positive and inclusive sex education in Canada's schools is vital to ensure the sexual health and development of young people. While recognizing that education is under provincial and territorial jurisdiction, I believe that Bill S-203 offers an ideal opportunity to launch a national sex education and awareness campaign, or at least to update the guidelines produced by the Public Health Agency of Canada, which date back almost 13 years, 2008.
Colleagues, as studies show, and as the preamble to Senator Mivi Deschênes' bill reminds us, if it is proven that viewing sexually explicit images has harmful effects on the development of our youth, it is imperative that we take the necessary measures to reduce the availability of such content to minors. We know that the Internet is vast and uncontrolled. At present, it is unfortunately up to the consumer to erect the barriers required to counter some of the harmful content. As the CRT states, and I quote, The CRTC does not regulate internet content because consumers can already control their access to inappropriate content through filtering software. In addition, any potentially illegal content is governed by existing hate crime laws and can be addressed through other avenues such as civil or court action. Is this sufficient justification when it comes to exposing young people to sexually explicit material that may have a negative impact on their development? In my opinion, absolutely not. And let's face it, kids often know how to get around parental control software better than we do, if such software is actually used. We know that regulating online content is difficult, and Canada is not the only jurisdiction thinking about this issue. And while S-203 does not regulate everything in this area, in my view, it strikes the right balance by allowing adults to still access pornographic content, but limiting the exposure of minors. It would be interesting to consider how this bill would fit in with other government initiatives, such as the Digital Charter of Canada and Bill C-11, or the government's commitment to creating new social media regulations on the removal of illegal content within 24 hours. To find out, colleagues, we need to study and pass Bill S-203 and then move it to the other place. That is what I urge you to do as quickly as possible.
Conclusion. Beyond creating offenses to protect young people from the negative impacts of exposure to sexually explicit images, Bill S-203 gives us a prime opportunity to launch a frank and open conversation on the protection of our young people. It challenges us to meet the urgent need for positive, inclusive, judgment-free sex education that will help our young people to reach their full potential. So I look forward to voting on this bill and sending it to committee for further study. So, honorable colleagues, I think it's time for the question to be called. Thank you. Je vous remercie.